bum ba bum 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 ba bum 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 ba bum 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 ba bum 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 bum. Hey guys, GHAZZY TV here with another Diablo 4 build guide video, and in this one I'm going to talk about the exploding shadow mist kind of build for the Necromancer. Now the thing is with this build is that I deemed that the shadow-based builds for Diablo 4 would be the best Necromancer builds you could play before the game launched, yet everybody laughed at me and said, no GHAZZY, it's Bone Spear. And here we are, the very first player to defeat a tier 100 nightmare dungeon is in fact using this build. His name is Naecabon, that's what we call him, and he's been in my chat and we've been optimizing this build. I saw some other people making variations of the build he had as build guides already. I wanted to hold off till now, and the reason for that is that we've been optimizing and basically perfecting the abilities and the skill trees as well as the Paragon board for this. I'm sure we can make some adjustments to it, even though the setup that we have, I think, is the best for now. Now, with that said, I do want to point out that if you're watching this video later, there is a link in the descriptions down below to the written build guide, which will always be kept up to date and should be the one you're looking at. And this video will serve more as a purpose of the generic approach, mechanical explanation of how the build works, and also showing gameplay. Now, that aside, if you do enjoy this video in this format, let me know in the comments below. Hit the like button, subscribe for more content, and yada yada. You know, the YouTube algorithm bullshit. Let's just crack into it, shall we? So we're going to start off by looking at the skill tree before we talk about the gear and modifiers and unique items and stuff like that. But I wanted to tackle the skill tree because of the main parts of it. The original version from Naecabon was to run a Reap spec'd into Acolyte's Reap to guarantee a corpse generation. Now, the problem is that depending on the type of content that you're running, it will dictate what type of spec you're going to be wanting to focus on. Now, this is nice as long as your character is able to reliably survive initiating a fight with a curse into an actual Reap. Now, in the higher tier of Nightmare dungeons, like 70, 80, or even 90 plus, this is very, very hard to come by, even with really high-end gear, really good high-end gear. I do not have this, and I decided that this would be something that would be better to skip in favor of Blight. Now, I don't have a perfect setup, but I'll talk about that when we get to the gearing. So instead of this way of generating a guaranteed corpse, we are instead speccing into Blight, 1 point for now, into the slow version, which will give us a better uptime of our dots on top of the enemies, but most importantly, a 15% multiplicative damage modifier. Outside of that, we're running the mandatory Hued Flush. This build is all about lucky hit, and then we are speccing into Maximize Corpse Explosion into the Miasma Blighted version. 1 point in the consumption of generating essence, because we don't need more. Maximize Fueled by Death, that's a multiplicative damage modifier. We get Death's Embrace for damage multipliers, and also defenses for us, even though the idea with this character is to run a high uptime of Blood Mist, rendering us immune to damage, we will be wanting to have defensive layers. Now, speaking of being in Blood Mist, we are maximizing our points in Blood Mist, which we're going to change later, but for now, this is how it looks, and also picking up the Ghastly one, leaving extra corpses behind when we run with this. Then obviously Amplify, we have 1 point to Decrepify, but most importantly the Abhorrent Decrepify, which is going to allow us to have that high uptime, if not permanent uptime of Blood Mist, as well as our Bone Storm. Now, we're also putting 1 point in Tendrils, and that's how we apply Vulnerable on enemies. This is very good for boss damage mostly, but other than that, it's mostly to stun them. Because of this, Vulnerable damage modifiers is not something you're gonna prioritize when it comes to your gearing, and this is because this is fine to run with in the lower tier content, but as soon as you go higher, guaranteeing Vulnerable on enemies is gonna be very hard, because for the most part, your priority would be to cast as much as you can, and then get the hell into Blood Mist ASAP, or you're gonna die. We're talking 90 plus nightmare difficulty when it comes to that playstyle. Obviously, maximized movement speed here. We get some extra damage from both Gloom and Terror, and 1 point in Crippling Darkness for the extra stun, which helps stagger bosses. Then we maximize Standalone and Memento Mori, and we have Shadow Blight Key passive, and we are going to take the crit strike chance. The reason for this is because Shadow Blight is not actually a dot. This is a hit that happens, and some of our other abilities do have a hit component to them, which means that in my current state of my character's gear, you can look at my critical strike chance. It's sitting at about 11%, and then another 20 from the Bone Storm, putting it at 33%. So every time our Shadow Blights are kicking in, there's a 33% chance that they're actually going to be, or 31 actually, going to be critting, which can actually do significant damage. The top end damage that I've seen on this character, which has very poor aspect powers, I've seen a 1.2, 1.3 million non-crit hits, by the way. So it actually can do tremendous amount of damage in certain situations. So I'm going to talk about the gear and aspect powers before moving forward, but I wanted to go through the skill tree because of how different it is. So we're starting from the top. Obviously, when it comes to our helmet, we're going to be running specific powers. In this one, we're running Blood Mist with Corpse Explosion, and the better the roll, the better it is, obviously. And I would strongly recommend having a life roll on this, and a total armor, cooldown reduction, and then either intelligence or even willpower will do really well, and that is because of our Paragon board, because willpower in general actually doesn't do much, but willpower is a perfectly fine modifier to keep. So I have actually a pretty decent helmet for this build. Next up would be the chest piece, which should have a disobedience, again stacking defenses. Even though we're supposed to be permanently inside Blood Mist, we're not going to have that happen. I'll talk about that in a bit. On the chest piece, I actually do prefer having a life modifier. There's a damage reduction from distant, which could be damage reduction from other sources, such as close or other conditional stuff, or you can have other modifiers in here. The idea with the chest is that all your modifiers is supposed to give you full DR, full defenses, so that's what you want to aim for. Howl from below is not mandatory, but it is very helpful. Now, what's really good with Howl from below is that you don't have to have the corpses that you're exploding to be on top of the bosses. They can be further away because they'll spawn a skeleton which will run to the enemies and then explode and put the Miasma Blighted version there. That's why Howl is not a mandatory item, but it's definitely something you're going to want. The modifiers you're looking for is not the 2 bottom lucky hit, but rather the first one. We want as much lucky hit as possible, and if you look at the current stats of my character, which doesn't have that good gear, I actually only have bonus lucky hit 40.2%. What's really good with lucky hit is that it actually updates directly on the tooltip, so you can actually directly see how big of an impact the lucky hit chance have. So Howl from below, really good. Focus on lucky hit chance. And then we go to the pants. There's a couple of handful of different versions you can play with this build. Now, I think that with the best in slot weapon, Temerity unique could be a good option. But I think that for generic pushing high end game, a pair of rare pants going with the Shielding Storm is very attractive, because the idea is to have a permanent uptime of our Bone Storm. Giving us the barrier gives us that extra layer of defense, which I'll talk about once we're done with the gear and aspect. Modifiers is not what you're looking at. The generic damage reduction is a modifier you're going to skip on the pants, and instead you want to have +3, and with upgrade it turns into +4 level of Blood Mist. Now the reason for that, and why we talked about the skill tree first, is that if you get +4 to Blood Mist, you can remove your 4 points from Blood Mist and put them into Blight. Suddenly you'll have further more damage that ticks that will trigger lucky hit very high, because it has a higher base lucky hit than Corpse Explosion by I believe it's 5 or 10%. And it also deals more damage. This helps with rares and endgame bosses very, very well. So that's why you're going to want that. And then obviously damage reduction from close enemies, Corpse Explosion, and damage reduction with enemies that are affected by shadow damage over time. Now we come to the boots. So Greaves have the empty. We are not using Sever. They have the base implicit that we want, which is plus evade charges. They give intelligence, which is okay. The willpower is arguably better, but again, intelligence is fine. SS cost reduction doesn't matter. However, the lucky hit chance with shadow damage is insanely good. This is the only pair of boot modifiers that I believe that you can get increase of lucky hits. This is the kind of boots you're going to want to wear when you're pushing those really high Nightmare Dungeon tiers. If you don't want to push and you want to have faster clearing, instead of having that lucky hit as well as the extra damage reduction, you can run double movement speed boots. And double movement speed boots refers to movement speed that is generic, like the amulet here. And then there's another modifier that gives you movement speed for a couple seconds after killing an elite. That's how you're speeding with this build for clearing rather than pushing. I'm currently setting my character up for those high pushes, so I'm going to use Greaves of the Empty. Again, not mandatory. And the weapon, the Black River, I'd arguably say it's not mandatory, because I think that the Howl from below is more important. If you're not using this unique, you should be looking at running a wand with a lucky hit chance. This is not the best in slot piece. Black River is really, really good. However, the stats that you benefit from is damage to distant enemies. That's if you're leaving behind dots on the ground and you're leaving the whatever stragglers there, they're going to die faster. Damage to healthy enemies, that's going to go away really quick. Fueled by death is nice. That's a damage modifier. Intelligence is okay. Life and kill is okay, I guess. It's better if you're running Temerity, which I don't think you should. Corpse Explosion consumes 4 additional corpses, allows each Corpse Explosion to deal a lot of damage. There has been tests, people saying that the radius does not get impacted. It's a bug. We're aware of that. You don't really care. However, there's also another bug with this, which is saying that you can only do damage with 5 Corpse Explosion pools at the same time. which means that those 5 pools should be doing more damage, as they should be consuming more than 1 corpse, or at least a couple of them, thanks to this weapon. The reason this is not the best in slot actually is because the best in slot item looks like this. If we change this to a Necromancer, and I will show you the weapon. It is a Doombringer. Now, this is absolutely insane. First off, the core skill damage scales are Blight. The generic all damage scales all are damage. Lucky hit, chance to heal, nice, okay, I guess. If you have Temerity, that would actually be really good. That's why we've been talking about Temerity being an option for this build. Max life, that's okay. Lucky hit, up to 25% chance to deal X shadow damage to surrounding enemies and reducing their damage down by 20%. Since we are going to be playing this build in a very specific way, we're going to hit so many times, and the idea is a focused lucky hit. This allows this weapon to be the most insane and most broken, both single target and clearing weapon you can use, because that shit is going to trigger a lot, and it should trigger the next step for your Shadow Bite key passive, so your damage will skyrocket with something like this. The offhand, this is something I made a video about. You can check out the links in the descriptions below. In that video, I'm showing how to farm the Molten Lotus. This is an offhand coming from a specific unique enemy, which is in the world. A very high chance to, a very high spawn rate. I think it's once every 2-3 minutes. You can even reload to spawn it. I have a video covering all of this. They can drop up to 845 item level. Quick recap is that that is located right there. There's a priestess in this location. You talk to her till you annoy her enough for her to attack you, and she will always drop this. And the higher level you are, the higher chance of ancestral. And even for level 60, you have the chance to drop 845. The reason this is so good is the modifiers is lucky hit chance. There's cooldown reduction on the base, but there's lucky hit chance, lucky hit to slow, which helps stagger bosses. And the last modifier, I believe, is crowd control duration, which you can then re-enchant, which costs nothing. The video covers all of this. And you can actually do 2 things with it. Now, you're going to want to run cooldown reduction, but you can roll a secondary lucky hit chance. You can actually have double on this. Power on the offhand is Shadow Blight, the Decay. This makes the key passive do even more damage. It's just absolutely insane, because it increases the next Shadow Blight key passive damage by 38% up to 40. Stacking up to 5 times. It's really, really effective. The power on your boots, should you be running rare boots, by the way, should either be the Unstoppable Ghost Walker, I believe it's called. If we look at utility, mobility, we have Wind Striker, which is okay. Otherwise, you run Ghost Walker. So it's one of those. I would preferably run Ghost Walker myself, since we're going to be sitting in Blood Mist quite a lot. Moving on to the amulet. This is a blighted chain. The blighted makes us deal tons of extra damage after Shadow Blight key passive ticks 10 times, and that happens very fast in big packs. And the damage increase lasts for 6 seconds. I have a really bad roll for this. However, the modifiers you're looking for is, first off, movement speed. It would be good to have a secondary movement speed, but the main priority of modifiers from your amulet should be, first and foremost, should be cooldown reduction. I have a really bad roll on that, as you can see. The second modifier could be anything from levels of terror, levels of, which is down here, levels of gloom would work as well, and stuff like that would work really, really effectively. So there's definitely even fueled by death and stuff like that. So there's quite a lot that you can actually benefit. Even things like Death Embrace, as well as amplified damage. All of these things that gives you more damage is really, really nice. And having one of those is very attractive. Off to the first ring is a Blood Soaked. This is a Blood Mist Leaves a Trail that deals damage. As you can see, I have a really bad roll on this. Again, my gear is kind of shitty. Modifiers, however, it's very important to point out that the rings, the item power on the ring, actually matters a lot for the Blood Soak, because the numerical value of the Blood Mist imprint, will scale off your item level. It would actually be lower on this one, because the power has been taken from a lower item level ring, and then I place it on this one. As you can see, if I had this power on this ring and then upgraded it, I would have had better numbers, if I'm not mistaken. Modifiers, however, again, we are running shadow damage, we're running lucky hit, very important, and there's a life roll, and then there's vulnerable damage. Like I mentioned before, the vulnerable damage could be changed to dot damage or whatever, but it's okay to have the vulnerable damage. It's a very good scaler, not something we're always going to be guaranteeing the higher tiers. Lucky is most important, and life is very, very, very important here, and that is because that life scales with the item power of the ring. Last item is a Circle of Ultimate Shadow. This makes our Bone Storm and Blood Wave into Darkness skills very important. The higher the numerical value, the better. we have taken this power. As you can see, the power is higher than what the values can roll between inside this item, and that is simply because I took it from a higher item power ring and put it onto this one. And the way you do that is by upgrading that ring before extracting the power and then placing it here. Modifiers, again, we have lucky hit, we have vulnerable damage, damage against shadow enemies over time, and then there's shadow damage. It's a bit too expensive for me to keep rolling to try to get a life roll on this one. That's why I stopped doing it, but that would be the next step. Instead of one of the damage modifiers, either shadow or shadow damage against overtime enemy, damage to affected by shadow damage over time enemies could have been a life roll instead, which would have been better. Now, I keep talking about damage reduction and defensive stats and all that, and the reason for that is because of the generic gameplay. But before we go into that and showing you the gameplay, I'm going to mention the Paragon Board. Now, again, I'm going to have all of this covered in detail in the descriptions below, but I'm going to give you a quick rundown if you guys want to copy what I currently have. I'm still tweaking the perfection to perfect this approach. But right now, we are essentially taking the nose on the right-hand side, getting the resilience on the left. The first socket is a territorial, and then we're moving up into a wither board, which we definitely want. This is what makes willpower so beneficial for a build like this instead of intelligence. And then we're running into the jewel, which is in this case a scourge shock glyph. And as you can see, we move on to the left-hand side. This is a flesh eater board, which we're taking, and we're also putting a control glyph in this position. And obviously, you're going to want more intelligence, so the next points I'm going to be spending will be going up here and taking this entire row, so I can put the intelligence here and the intelligence here. The math I'm going to do is check if it's worth going for these mods, rather than just taking every willpower I can find because of Wither. I'm going to get back to you guys on that one. And then we're going down, and in here we have a Scent of Death node, and also the glyph in the last portion here is going to be a Darkness glyph. Now, again, I'm going to make some changes to the board in the last end because we actually do have some crit stuffs here because of the 31% crit. But again, check the link in the descriptions below to the written guide for more in-depth detail about this. And this will be posted very soon, if it hasn't already, when this video is public. So, let's go check out the actual gameplay. So, I'm going to show you a pretty high tier if I can. So this is a tier 65. Again, my gear is not too good. Drifting Shades chases us, very annoying. And the monster deals 20% extra cold, and then there's less poison damage taken. Less poison damage taken on enemies. We are fine. Monster attacks from distance can disable healing potion. That's okay. So this is going to be a very difficult dungeon, and let's go give it a try. First things first. The best consumable for a build like this would be the lucky hit one. I'm not going to pop that for this showcase, so I'm going to take something like Shadow Rest. Doesn't matter. I'm only doing this for the extra experience. And the playstyle is very simple. First, we're going to see how bad a tier 65 is going to hit me. But the idea is that I want to stick in Blood Mist as much as possible. If they don't one-shot me, I'll try to group them up. And that can get help with corpse tendrils for that. So normally, what I would do is I will always start a fight off by decrepifying them. And then if I don't have to, I will cast Bone Storm. If I don't have to go into Blood Mist. If I don't have to go into Blood Mist after Bone Storm, I will cast a Blight. If I don't have to go into Blood Mist after that and there I see a corpse, I will actually pop a Corpse Explosion. Then I will go into Blood Mist. So basically, at any given time, you will always curse. And then, do I have to go Blood Mist? Then do it. Otherwise, you go Bone Storm. If you don't have to pop Blood Mist then you do it. If you don't have to, cast Blight. If you don't have to go Blood Mist, Corpse Explosion if there's a corpse, otherwise Blood Mist. Once you're inside this, there will be tons of corpses spawning even after the explosion is happening. If you are not in panic to get back into Blood Mist when it's over, which the cooldown, depending on the size of the pack, will determine, you will cast Corpse Tendrils. And if you don't have to do it again, you'll cast Blight. And if you don't have to do it again, you can cast another manual Corpse Explosion and then back into Blood Mist. Make sure the curse is always there. And as you can see, this lasts 10 seconds. Now, in the super high difficulty, you're going to have to do this combo on even smaller packs, which means you're not going to have 100% uptime of Blood Mist. So it's very important you play this accordingly with the really high tiers. This is a tier 65 in suboptimal gear. I'm level 89, and the enemies are, what level are they? They are, let me find one. If there are any enemies around. Hello? They're level 119. So as you can see, what I would do here, I would curse, I would blight, and then I would do this if I had to. So as you can see here, the damage is a very, very subpar. And this is basically how the build's working. So here we have a bigger pack. I would curse, I would do this. As you can see, as long as I don't have to go into my Blood Mist, I will not do so. And this is why it's so important to have consistent damage reduction so that you can take those hits when you have to. Now we have Barrier, which is really, really, really good. As you see, I didn't dare to stay there for the next setup, so I would do this instead. And I got silenced, really annoying. And I'll go into Blood Mist again. You can see the cooldown on my Blood Mist is ready. And I'll basically pop my Corpse Tendrils and Bone Storm, and then kill the rest. And as you can see, my cooldown's not ready, and that's because of the pack size was not big enough to achieve that state. That is why the defensive layers is so important to not neglect with this build. A lot of people saying that, oh, you're just going to sit in full immortality, but that's not the case. I wanted to pop the Corpse Tendril there, but I couldn't. So in this case, I will pass a Blight and then back in. And that's basically how the build is played. Curse, Bone Storm. All right, I'll pop a Corpse Explosion. I'll pop Blight because my Blood Mist is not ready. Now it is, but I'm not going to bother because I don't want to have a cooldown for the next pack. So now I'm just going to kite around and just dodge and use my Blight. As you can see here, these pack, I don't have to kill them. I could outrun them instead, thanks to the extra evades. So it's all about learning how the build is played and then play accordingly. It's very important to understand how the build's played for optimal performance with a build like this. So as you can see there, I almost died. I'll pop this, I'll get a Corpse Tendril out, and I'm dead. So this is a very high tier content. Obviously, it's way above what I should be doing. I'm going to use this as a gameplay footage for this guide either way, to show you the capabilities of pushing higher tier content, even though you don't have the perfect gear for it. And it will also show you how important playing the build correctly it actually is. So in this case, I will... Okay. As you can see, there's a lot of issues with survivability. I do have some lack of gearing for it, and it's all about learning the flow of it. So I used one more ability than what I actually could, because I can die from 2 to 3 hits in a situation like this. And if you're running this in, I can show you some tier 50s or something like that, and show you how big of a difference it is when you're running this in easier content. So as you noticed here, the shield from the barrier that you get from Bone Storm is basically keeping you consistently alive. This is why I think something like using Temerity could be a good thing with the lucky hit stacking to actually create overheal, because of the simple fact that it will directly generate a consistent heal for you that you can run, because you can't always guarantee that you're gonna have permanent uptime of your Bone Storm because of the size of enemies. Now you can run through content on the lower tiers. I'm going to show you that as well, but for now this is what I'm going to show you. You see the cooldown wasn't off, but now it is. Again, with better gear it would obviously be a bit more reliable. What I try to do is try to make sure I have everything ready and used, make sure everything's cursed to pop into the form. Again, they're level 119. I'm not even max leveled. I don't even have proper gear for this build. Well, I have proper gear, but not optimal, obviously. But as you can see, it is still more than playable. And the barrier, it is so important. So once this barrier is out... Okay, we have a Butcher. That's going to be interesting to see how this feels. If you encounter a Butcher, it is super important that you... that you stay within enemies. A lot of enemies. A lot of them. The reason for this is that you want to stay immune, but most importantly, you want to make sure you have that barrier running. Otherwise, you're going to run into problems, trust. Now, my goal is to get back into Blood Mist. And as you can see, we're surviving pretty well. Can go back into Blood Mist. And even the Butcher is consistently taking proper damage here. Go back into Blood Mist. They are way above our level right now, and despite that, we are surviving. This Butcher can actually completely, just absolutely demolish us. What's really good with Blood Mist is obviously the fact that we are, in fact, able to get this extra damage. Like, he's stunning me, and because of my barrier, I'm not even going to bother getting out of it. My barrier goes away, I will get out of it. And back into it. Smack him up. Get some barrier going. You see how effective the barrier is? I don't even have to go into the form right now. I'll get some... Oh, actually one shot me. But as you can see, it's all about keeping the barrier up, which is why I want to try to see if I can make a Temerity work on this. Despite that and the lack of gearing, if I had levels, level scaling does so much for a build like this. It's crazy. But that basically shows you this type of content. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a tier 50, or 50-ish, and we'll show you that gameplay. So as you can see, the higher tier 65, 70 plus is the ones where it starts to get really tough. I think that with extra levels, that would actually have been more than manageable by the look of things. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a more reasonable tier 5 to 60 kind of approach. And the modifiers you want to stay away from would be things like the resource burn doesn't matter, but when the enemies take less damage is very, very frustrating. This one, for example, less damage crits, you don't really care about that. Whereas you have other modifiers. Lifesteal can be a bit annoying like that one. This is cold damage, less damage with close target. This one I would never run. That's 40% less damage from pretty much most of our damage consistently. So I would not run something like that. I would just scrap that. But we're going to run a, let's see, we'll run a 55 and I'll show you the insane difference. Now this is mostly, the biggest difference is mostly coming from the fact that you are in a position where the level scaling matters so much in this game. This means that if you're not level 100 and you're doing this tier 65 like I did, you are by default already going to be at a disadvantage, a huge disadvantage. This is what makes the higher tier Nightmare Dungeons so much harder, because you can't level above level 100, but obviously the Nightmare Dungeons will give you monsters of much higher level. This is a tier 50 something, and I'm going to show you how big of a difference this actually makes when it comes to the performance of a build like this. First off, the damage reduction that you're putting off is going to make you not be able to die as easily. That's one of the parts of it, and obviously because you're going to do so much more damage, it's going to be much easier to manage in general when it comes to just surviving the content and killing them fast. The problem is that the lower the tier content, the fewer hits you're doing, the fewer lucky hits you're doing, which is going to present you within a position where you might not fully reset your abilities. So just to give you a quick rundown before we run this map is the actual mechanics of lucky hit. So we have a 56% lucky hit of a corpse explosion, which can hit up to 5 stacks. So that's 5 times you can do this, and they hit 12 ticks per over the course of 6 seconds. That's 2 hits per second. Times 5 in an optimal damage approach. That's basically 10 hits per second. Blight is another 2 hits. So that's another 2 hits you're doing. That's 12 hits per second plus any other sources of hits, but those are the 2 main ones. Those hits are essentially going to present you with the chance of spawning a corpse, and the corpse spawning is non-boss is 12%. So out of those 12 hits per second, we have a little bit over half of those. That's 6 lucky hits per second. Out of 6 lucky hits, 12% of those are going to generate a corpse. That's how the lucky hit component is working for these different effects. For example, we're going to have a 18% of those 6 hits are going to stun them, and 24% of those 6 hits are going to be fearing them, as an example. So this is how it works. That's why I think the Temerity could be such a cool thing to use instead of shielding Storm and relying on that. So here's the difference, where you still take big damage from these big guys, and then put the Storm up. You can do this. We're back into the Storm. You see how much faster they're dying. Obviously, these guys are level 109, so they're still above us, but they are much, much easier to manage. Much easier. And on top of that, you don't have to set everything up perfectly to get that big dam. You can be outside of Blood Mist, just casting your corpse explosions, and it is a perfectly fine way to play the game. Whereas in the super high-end difficulties, that itself is very, very hard, because you have to be prioritizing staying inside the Blood Mist to be able to survive, as well as doing damage, obviously. So as you can see here, I can just make sure everything is cursed there, rather than just casting the curse once or twice. I am literally able to make sure everything is cursed. And now I can just stay on the side casting the Corpse Explosion, simply because I know I can take more than 1 or 2 hits from some ranged attacks that might actually kill me in the very hard difficulties when I'm trying to push the boundaries to what the character is able to do, which is what I'm currently working on, and it's why we wanted to try the level 65 in this case. So now, as you can see, this is a tier 50, and the damage is just way better. You can run away from those, don't have to kill them. Curse this, Blood Mist into it without even setting anything up. Get the Corpse Tendril in, toss in a Blight, and you can just leave the pack. Make sure they're cursed, stay in the Blood Mist form here. You get a Corpse Tendril out, no problemo, they're all dead. And we can move on to the next pack of enemies. So as you can see, we're basically not dying whatsoever. And I think that for generic clearing, especially in moments like this, where you're not always guaranteeing the full uptime of your Bone Storm, it is more attractive or safer for you to essentially wait with your Corpse Explosions a little bit, with your Bone Storm a little bit, so that you can use them versus those harder packs where you really need that barrier. But I also firmly believe that in those situations, having something like Temerity would allow you to have both the shield up more consistently and just more reliably, which is why I'm going to be looking into that on the stream later today. Again, check out the written description for a written guide for the build to make sure that you see any and all changes that I might add to the build. This map specifically does have a boss, so it's going to show you the actual gameplay on the boss here, which is going to be really good for you to see. Other than that, the gameplay is very generic. All I'm doing is essentially just making sure that things are cursed, and then I'm popping in the Blood Mist. My cooldown will be ready before it's over. I can pop the Storm here. There's quite a few enemies. Make sure more cursed, then into Blood Mist. And things are just going to start melting. And the bigger the pack you're hitting, the better your cooldown, obviously. But also, everything else just starts scaling. We're going to take... Yep, that's one of those. I have to clear this. Interesting. We can run for the other parts. So as you can see here, I'm just making sure that things are cursed before I jump into it. They didn't die. I'm going to pop my Storm here because I saw that these enemies were pretty big. A couple of hard-hitting enemies there. See, I'm stuck now. I'm still able to survive. That is exclusively because of the... it is exclusively because of the... it's exclusively because of the lower tier content that we're running right now. Same thing here. The enemies are not dead. They're spread. These red specters are very tough to deal with in many cases. So what I'm doing to avoid just dying to it is obviously make sure that I'm in Blood Mist when I need to. But if I don't have to go into Blood Mist, I will just avoid it. So again, it's a lot about learning how to play the build to make it as optimal as possible. As you can see here, I don't have my my Blood Mist ready, so I just made sure I kited them a little bit, make sure I'm in form for it, pop the tendrils, get that CC out, and I can pop it again, and now everything is going to die. And that's essentially how we're going to play the build and how the build's played. But as you saw in the harder difficulty one, it is way more tight than that. I'm suddenly in a position where I have to be very careful with how I place things. I have to be careful with my positioning. Whereas content like this, you are just going to run through that content consistently. So you do this. You see here, I have some red here. They're not dead. I'm going to pop my Bone Storm because of that, because my cooldown wasn't ready. Now I can go into Blood Mist again. It's all about timing your cooldowns and knowing when to press what. It takes a little while to get used to it. But once you get the hang of it, this build is insanely good. We saw that earlier, that I mentioned the movement speed on the boots. So you already know that I am currently playing a slower variant of this, and this is more designed for a smoother capabilities of handling those super high tier pushes, which is what I'm trying to make this build do right now. So I want to do a Nightmare 100 with this. Enemy's not dead, so I'll make sure I pop the Bone Storm there. So that's why I'm a little bit slower. If the things are dicey like they are right now, all I'm doing is actually just casting one spell before I go into... I'm literally just casting one spell before going into my Blood Mist, just to minimize the time of which I can take a lot of damage. See here, that's a little tight, so I went into Blood Mist. I saw I had some corpses. I don't have enough cooldown. Bone Storm again. Get out of the explosion. Pop that Blight up. That's top or damage. He's gonna die as I run. So we're looking for the last little box. We can show you the boss right now. Here's is this an event? This is an event. Altar of Bishi Bosch. Again, I don't have my stuff up, and in this case, I think Temerity could do very well. I'm not sure how well Temerity will work on the harder endgame content, though, so I'll have to get back to you guys on that one. But for now, this is the optimized plan we have for high-end pushing and speed clearing in general. As you can see here, there's a lot of ranged packs here on the side, so I will do this and pop my Bone Storm, Recurse, Blood Mist. And here we have everything ready. I'll just pop the... I have my Blood Mist ready, and instead of reapplying anything else, I already have everything used, the curse and yada yada. So what I did there was I just popped the Bone Storm, or sorry, Corpse Tendrils into Blood Mist to get that extra CC and stack them up a little bit because they're kind of spread. And now I'm gonna wait with my Bone Storm because I don't really need it. And what we're looking for is the box down here. Again, I just cursed. I went into Blood Mist ASAP. I could use the Bone Storm here, but I don't feel like I need it. Again, you'll get the hang of it, and the better your gear becomes, the easier it is to tell those details. So again, a lot of people have been saying, oh, but you're just going to get 100% damage immunity. That's how this build is. It's broken. It should be nerfed. I personally disagree that this should be nerfed. I think that because of the fact that you require quite extensive gearing to making this build playable in the way that it is played, still requires you to be able to tank things, so you can't permanently sit in there. Bosses, I'm going to start with a Curse into Bone Storm into Blight. So Curse, Bone Storm, Blight, and now I'll pop my Blood Mist because I don't have any corpses. Once this is over, I'll Corpse Tendril and Blight, and then pop normal Corpse Explosions and more Blight, reapply the Curse, get a Tendril out, and then Blood Mist again. And as you can see, the boss is just completely melting. And that's it. This was a, whatever tier it was, 50-something. Absolutely a joke. It's just a joke how you do these type of tiers. They are completely irrelevant. It's only a matter of pushing the higher nightmare dungeons, and in those you have to be very careful. So this video is a little bit long, but there's a lot of gameplay footage and a lot of descriptions of how this build is played, and I think it was better to show you guys the stuff in action and show you the higher tier. We got lucky and got a Butcher. You saw how hard that can be if you're not able to tank those hits. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to optimize this gear and try to push this up to a tier 100 Nightmare Dungeon. Again, a big shout out to Naecabon, who actually came up with the original design of this. I have tweaked this both skill tree wise and Paragon wise, slightly with the gear wise as well. So I made quite a lot of changes to it now to finalize this optimized state of it, which I'm very happy with. And again, if you guys like this build, check out the link in the description below to the actual written guide, and hit the like button, subscribe for more content, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Till then, stay safe, keep rocking.